Hey, everybody, and welcome to TNM Coaching Unplugged. I'm so grateful and happy to be with you once again. I'm grateful that you're sharing our podcast, that you're benefiting in your life, in your business. We're very grateful for our audience growing. Keep on sharing, keep on loving this podcast. And once again, welcome to this amazing conversations. Today's conversation is going to be a special one. We're going to talk about ambitious leaders, executives, and organizations that really need to hear what we have to say in this podcast because we're stepping into this bigger role that is already and sometimes neglected publicly. And privately, this is one of the most lonely, pressured, and misunderstood experiences in business. The truth is that many highly capable leaders that are listening to this conversation sometimes walk their path really alone and lonely. And sometimes when they move from one position to another position, usually they need to manage complex situation, political landscape of the organization, their own emotions. And sometimes those transitions can be unforgiving. So if you are a leader, executive who is moving to the bigger role, to the bigger position, and if you really want to understand these executive transitions, our guest today is going to help you out. He's going to talk about all of this. My guest today, Navid Nazemian, he will be exploring how the master executive transitions really work. He has had a tremendous experience building up, coaching, supporting leaders, really helping them out with this transition. And he wrote this wonderful book that he's published and everybody likes, and it's becoming bestseller, which is Mastering Executive Transition. In today's podcast, we're going to look into that. We're going to open to many, many interesting conversations and questions and explore this landscape for everybody to enjoy. So welcome, Navid. Very lovely to have you on this podcast today.
Thank you so much, Zoran. This has to be one of the kindest introductions I've ever had. So I just want to thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So we always start with this kind of hero's journey a little bit. And my first question to you is, how did you get in this field, in this industry, and why this transition, especially coaching and consulting and mentoring executives, is important to you?
Sure. So I spent 20 years working in the human resources function, a function that is very dear to my heart and something that I really was aspiring to move into. And on the back end of 6 years working in sales roles. And once I got my first opportunity, it was always a bit of an intriguing observation for me, Zoran, which was, you hire the very best of the best, oftentimes. You spend a lot of time and energy in making sure that you do the perfect selection for the position, for the organization. And despite that, there are a number of those executives that don't make it successfully on the back end of being hired. And so it was always an intriguing observation for me. And I worked for 5 of the world's most admired companies on this planet. I worked for Adidas. I worked for GE at the time in the year 2005. GE was the most admired company on the planet. I worked for BAT. I worked for Roche. I worked for Vodafone. And despite that, I find that this particular process is never really as strong as it could be and never as effective as it needs to be. And that led me to the idea of exploring the market, reading more about it myself, only to realize that nobody else, for whatever reason, had been really thinking about this topic deeply. And that led me to start to think about, I might as well write the first book on this topic. And that's what I went on to do. And 7 years later, the book launched. This is 4 years ago now. And it became a totally unexpected success, I must say.
Right, because you probably tap into the pain point that everybody was struggling, but as I said, people are neglecting. So why do you feel that brilliant leaders are struggling during this executive transition? What creates that, pain point for them, so to say?
Yes. So in my book, I speak about exponentially challenged executives finding themselves in a poly crisis. I mean, today is the 23rd of April, 2026. And I am based in Dubai, and this region has been dragged into a conflict without doing anything really to be involved. And that's just one example of how you may be touched by something as an executive and as an organization that you really didn't even have on your radar. But there are many more reasons why this is such a, delicate undertaking, let's say. If I look at the CEO tenure, it's been trending downwards for as long as this has been tracked. And just in the last 7 years, it has come down to 5.9 years on average, meaning 1 in 7 CEOs do not get to celebrate the third year in the same position.
Wow.
If I look at organization complexity, and this was done by 2 French professors who looked at, okay, if you look at an organization today and look at a similar or same organization 15 years ago, is it more or less complex to lead in this new environment? And guess what? The complexity has increased by a factor of 35. So it's 35 times more complex today than it was 15 years ago to lead in a matrix type organization. And last but not least, this is an entire chapter in my book, and I break down the top 10 reasons for executive transition failure. I also would like to point out something that is rarely spoken about, which is it's the functional or the technical skills, Zoran, that gets you hired at the C-suite level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the lack of the so-called soft skills that gets you fired at the same level, meaning it's typically to do with either people, politics, or culture that can be a hindrance to your success once you have been appointed.
So you said technical skills are there. A lot of CEOs, executives, they will have what it takes to run the business, right? So they are probably hired for that, but the soft skills are lacking. And soft skills, as you mentioned, politics, it's one, how do you manage political landscape? So let's open that one first. So what is the soft skill of being able to manage that?
Yes. So I can cite an actual example from my own time when I moved. That was not the first time, but the second time I moved into a global head office of an organization. And I remember those days very vividly because this was an organization that was very clear on remit, mandate, role clarity, all those things, right? And I was in a global position meant that we had what we called at the time in that company the delegation of authority limits. And so that table, I was a vice director. That was my job title. At my level, I could essentially sign off anything up to the threshold of 150,000 Swiss francs. So that was kind of my delegation of authority level. I do remember I made an expense for something like 15K for a small HR project I was leading. And I started to get those phone calls from finance, from HR, from all sorts of different stakeholders to ask whether I had double or triple checked this spend with so-and-so and this one and that one. And I, in my German way, I said, no, I haven't, because why would I? I mean, that's what the delegation of authority table is there for, right? I mean, it's very easy. I have, spent 10% of what I'm supposed to spend. And so as far as I'm concerned, I'm not seeking any consultation before doing that also next time.
Mm-hmm.
That same day, I had an unplanned meeting with my line manager who sat me down and started to explain to me that, of course, the delegation of authority is there for, a good reason. But despite that, because this is the head office and every one of the HRDs is super kind of X-rayed against one another and so on. If I wanted to do that next time, I should probably spend more time liaising with the relevant stakeholders just to make sure that they are comfortable. And so it's a super simple example, Zoran, but can you imagine the magnitude of if I were to ignore that, or if nobody would point me to that, and this goes down as a bit of a yellow card in the background, and there's another one, eventually you're being shown the red card. So things may look perfectly defined and well articulated, but as soon as you move into the regional or global head office, things will need to be done differently. And sometimes it's the heightened levels of politics that those executives are underestimating before they move into those positions.
Right, exactly, because they take things for granted. Like, this is a good example. You took something for granted. You understood how the system actually works, but the landscape of navigating the political global headquarters is completely different. So that's something that executives need to learn and need to be accustomed to and need to really assess in that position, right?
Absolutely.
And you mentioned also culture. How would the executives that step into the position? And I've coached CEOs who come in and with a full-on willingness to transform, to change. They also are given mandate to do something different, to disrupt, maybe to do it better. and then there is a cultural residue of what are inheriting. So what do you feel people need to be mindful of when it comes to facing the culture as it is, and then how they can evolve the culture to support them to execute in the best possible way?
Yes. So I would like to cite one of the examples I'm using in my book. And by the way, Zoran, my book has 156 citations. So the appendix is 22 pages long. So I literally spent 5 years researching this topic in and out. I claim that there isn't a single white paper or a research paper up until the year 2020, when I finished my work and went to publish it, that I have not read on the topic. And at that time, there was no ChatGPT, there was no large language model available. So it was really sitting down, Googling and researching. And I would like to use the example of Dr. Leo Apotheker. This is a gentleman that was hired into Hewlett-Packard as the new group CEO. And I also, I'm happy to declare that I don't know this individual personally, and I've never spoken to him. What I learned about him is all through the media and what's publicized about him. So he was brought to Hewlett-Packard with a big mandate, and the big mandate that the board of directors at that time asked him to deliver on was to really take HP from this almost, Sleeping Beauty type state that it was in. I mean, Hewlett-Packard at that time was the world leader in the personal computer segment. It was the world leader in laptops. It was the world leader in printers and the printing business, and not just for the consumers, but also for professional purposes. It had started to, branch out into servers, and the server business was taking off. And so it really was, quite successful if you just look at the numbers. And despite that, I think the board of directors at the time felt that if they were to look at Google, Apple, and some of the more aggressive kind of tech players, it's only a matter of time until they lose out to those more kind of nimble, agile, aggressive type, hardcore tech companies. So that was his mandate to bring him in, and he had prior experience with SAP, to bring him to really turn the company, attitude and culture around. And that's what he really went after. So he, and if people wanted to, there are these town halls, sometimes still to be found on YouTube and other media, where he was speaking from a big podium to 2,000 or 3,000 employees at one of the sites. And he was citing all the poor things that HP currently does and how they needed to shift the culture towards something more like SAP, which was his beloved prior company. And I don't think it takes a genius or an HR expert to say that it's probably not a good angle to come in, right? I mean, despite the fact that that is your mandate, because if you start to badmouth the current organization's culture and its practices, even though you know that there is, and probably everyone knows that there is improvement potential there, the way you do that, and if you were to hold in high regards your previous company's culture and what a nimble and agile and incredibly competitive culture that was, and that everybody needs to stop doing this shitty work and really look up to that other golden halo type example, it's probably not going to get the best out of people. There isn't going to be a lot of engagement around that sort of a vision. And in a matter of 10 months, he did a couple of these town halls and so on. He was actually fired by the same board of directors and the chair that had appointed him, because they saw that the descent and the engagement levels in the company were going completely the other direction. And that was actually not good for the business. Now, imagine if I wanted to use the same example with this individual or someone in the same situation. If he did only one thing, which is he would go and have these town hall meetings all around the world. He would actually say a few things, not just about his PhD degree and his MBA and this and that and what a fantastic career he's had, but to get a little more personal, maybe showing a photo of his family and speaking to them as a human being. And then asking them 3 questions, and then use a Menti or some other tool to capture the input. So the first question is, what about our existing culture is great and incredible and has served us well in the past and will continue to serve us well in the future? Free text, just enter whatever you have in terms of input. Second question, What is the one cultural trait we must stop demonstrating in the future? Because although it may or may not have served us well in the past, it certainly will not serve us well in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third question is, what one new cultural trait or habit do we need to start demonstrate that we haven't even demonstrated so far? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So he does these three questions, and he does it with all the big, town halls, and then there's the HR survey going out, and people at the time, over 200,000 people are going to participate. And then he comes back and says, okay, I've heard what you guys have shared with me, let's say 3 to 6 months into his role.
Mm-hmm.
These are the three core things, obviously aggregated as an input, that we must continue to do because they will continue to serve us well.
Mm-hmm.
These are the 2 or 3 things we must stop demonstrating because they will certainly not serve us well in the future. This is what you have shared with me, by the way. And these are the 2 or 3 things we must start to demonstrate because we believe that they are going to help us to make the shift. What would be the level of buying behind that approach compared to how he actually did it, which is talking down to them, being super aggressive, bad-mouthing the existing culture, and really praising in the highest terms what this other organization of him that he used to work for has demonstrated? You see the difference. And this is why when I created the so-called double diamond framework of executive transitions, which is a 7-phase framework, I gave particular attention to what I call the 5 C's. So the first one is context. Arguably, this is the most important C of all because it looks at the circumstance of the organization, the competition landscape, the governmental landscape, the societal landscape, and how this company is touching across those segments. The second C stands for culture. What is this organization famous for? What is this company known for, in good or bad ways, right? And what about the leadership in this organization? What about the values and how important are they? Are they just a name or a tag on a poster in a boardroom, or are they really actually lived up to, and so on? The third C looks at commitment. What is the organization committed to achieve for its customers, for its clients, and for society at large? The fourth one looks at circles. What are the circles of influence, power, and informal decision-making? This is one of the big mistakes I see sometimes with coaching clients, is that they just look at the org chart and then map the key stakeholders. And of course, they go by job title because that's usually, a sign that someone is influential. But as it just happens, there are also people who can be highly influential who may not have the most senior job title. And so you also need to map them in your stakeholder map. And then the fifth and last C is confidence. What are the levels of employee engagement in this organization? What is the leadership DNA here? What is considered a great leader and who is considered a poor leader, and why is that? And so by doing this very little exercise right at the outset with an incoming executive, what you are trying to do is to reduce the risk of them walking on these landmines that are lying everywhere, and sometimes completely invisible to the incoming executive.
Exactly. And I love that you put it in such a structured way, and so that they can see it and they become aware of it. Because I can see that this in executive transition, people are dealing with unknown a lot. And there's a lot of assumptions, there is misinformation, there is, of course, projection of the power of authority. But when we go through this process of this 5C, especially when it comes to the one that I love, which is the confidence. And I think this is an important topic to unpack as well, which is the psychological safety and emotional safety of executives in the transition. So when they understand the leadership as well and what organization requires from the leaders, then it's really easy for them to also adapt to the culture with the full confidence. So what do you see executives needs in first 18 months to fully display that level of confidence, in addition to going to 5C, which I think it's an amazing protocol that they can use? Anything else that will come to them that will strengthen their ability to manage this transition?
Yes. So I love the notion that you brought into the question, Zoran, which is 18 months, right? Again, there is this big myth out there, and it's probably down to the success of this other very famous book, which is called The First 90 Days, where, again, it's beyond me, Zoran, why any executive must be sitting on their hands, waiting patiently until day one, then start to run like crazy, and then drop the ball again on the 90th day in the new position. So my idea of transitioning at the top of the house is more a 12 to 18 months journey, which is also why if you look at the double diamond framework, it consists of 7 unique phases. And only one, this is phase 2, actually looks at the first 90 days. So I do not want to belittle the idea that there's anything wrong with being structured in your first day and up until the day 90. But if you think of it as 1/7 of the success formula, it certainly is not going to cut it for you, not at the very top in an organization. The first 90 days is a fantastic framework for anyone, individual contributor, maybe even a first-time manager. But that's about it. It won't really do it if you were to pay attention to that. And so coming back to your original question around confidence and how can this be helped and improve. So firstly, some other aspects of the double diamond framework. What I've done is I've broken down each of those 7 phases by providing a bit of an overview around, and again, this is based on those 156 citations of research. What are typical activities that the executive should expect during phase 1? During phase 2, during phase 3. And this is really based on research, as well as based on, I interviewed 20 C-suite executives just for the purpose of the book. So I enriched it with those insights that I gained from those executives who had transitioned multiple times previously. Then I go and say, okay, now that, imagine if you were my coaching client, you're the incoming CEO of Hewlett-Packard. Now that you know what are typical activities in this particular phase of yours, what are typical challenges and derailers that the research is also revealing? And I will read them out to you and I will give you an idea around what is often cited during this particular phase. But more importantly, Zoran, I would then say now over to you. I want you to spend some time to reflect on what are the challenges and derailers that you can see coming your way because of the uniqueness of the Hewlett-Packard's culture and its history, its upbringing, and so on and so forth. And more importantly, what are some of the early mitigation strategies you can think of to deal with those challenges and derailers at each of those 7 phases? So already, once we have done the 5 C's, you feel a little more confident and a little more assured around you're avoiding the biggest landmines. Then when we go into phase 1, 2, 3, and so on, at each particular phase, you have the research done for you, and you can now tailor make it into your unique circumstance and really taking something that is more broadly researched into your own little kind of, mini research around this microcosmos of yours that you're in charge. And then there are a few other aspects to the double diamond as well. So the reason I selected the image of 2 diamonds from the side facing one another is that you have this kind of a shape. And this shape, on one side, I speak about diverging, and on the other side, I speak about converging. Diverging means, Zoran, that especially if you're new in a role, let's say typically between phase 1 and phase 4, which roughly makes up your first 120 days in a position, and sometime before you actually start in a role. Divergence means you are collecting dots. You are collecting pieces of information. You are reading through papers, going through analyst conversations, reading through board material, looking at the company's strategy, speaking to key players to understand this all. And then convergence means at some point, typically around phase 4, phase 5, you need to stop collecting the dots and start to connect them with one another. Meaning at phase 4, 5, you are expected to come out with what you believe is your 2 to 3 big, hairy, audacious goals. What are you going to align the organization behind? And then get everyone aligned behind this and kind of starting to move. So that's the other aspect of the double diamond. And then there is 2 more things I want to share about the framework. One is at the top, I'm using someone else's framework. So at the top of the double diamond says, optimizing the energy levels of the leader. I can't tell you, Zoran, how many times I have come across this myself as an HRD, working with top executives, as and when the big promotion has taken place. They are sitting in the beautiful corner office and burning the midnight oil, cutting down on their sleep and really giving more and more time to the role because it's very demanding. It's typically the first time they are in that sort of a position. There is a gazillion different papers to read and digest and so on. And what they don't realize is that if you are, and I've had executives who are down to no more than 3 hours of sleep for a continued period of time, what you're actually doing is working against you without you realizing it. You're being short-tempered, your concentration is going down, and many other issues are coming your way that you can't quite foresee right now. So the optimizing energy levels of the leader is something I took from the work of a gentleman called Tony Schwartz. And Tony Schwartz published this article on Harvard Business Review. I'm not sure what year it was. It was probably 2016 or 2006. I don't know exactly. In that year was the most downloaded article on Harvard Business Review. And his research and this paper that he published said why you need to manage your energy, not your time. And that was really a fundamental shift around how you can think about energy, because one thing is for sure, and that's what the research suggests, executive transitions are more stressful than going through a divorce or a significant health challenge. So they are more energy draining, they're more stressful than arguably what can be super energy draining and stressful in a normal time. And for that reason, you also need to pay attention as to how you can optimize your 4 quadrants that ultimately nourish your energy levels. So that's one aspect. And then the last one, and then I will stop talking, is
you
the
don't.
fact that
We're learning a lot. Thank you so much for sharing. It's
great,
amazing.
great, is the fact that the first and the 7th phase of the Double Diamond Framework are the ones that are most often skipped. The first phase is, I call it the discover phase. This is your -90 to day 0, right? And this is the good work of another gentleman. His name is Michael Burrows. And he wrote this amazing book, super short. It's almost the size of a smartphone, 60 pages. He wrote this great book, which has the title Before Onboarding, Critical Success Strategies to Embed Before You Start in a New Executive Position. And he really makes the case that why would you have to wait until day 1 until you're technically in a role so you can start to, onboard and transition into this position? There are many things you can start to do as soon as the announcement has been made, as soon as people in the company know that you're the incoming CXO, as soon as you have already had a conversation with your future line manager, as soon as you're able to reach out and connect with your leadership team that you will be inheriting. So there are many things you can do without being in a role. And the 7th phase, I have to finish this with a D again. So this phase is called develop. So I don't know about you, Zoran, but I will never remember more than 3 things at the same time, which is why I named what each of the 7 phases with the first letter making up the word diamond. And that's how I remember my own 7 phases.
Of course, absolutely.
So the last phase is called develop. And that phase is all about sitting down with your coach. If nothing else, that 1-hour session is our moment with the executive to sit down and reflect on what's the journey been like the last 12 to 18 months. What were some bets that they made, and which one of those turned out to be true and which one was a complete, mistake or disaster? What surprises did they face along the way? And most importantly, if they have made any mistakes or anything that turned out differently than they had hoped it would be, what are the learnings as a result of those? And that one session, sometimes over 2 sessions or an extended session, really helps to embed the learning in the executive leader's mind and in the system. And this is when I call embodied knowledge, so that as and when they are going through a future transition at any point in the future, they have an embodied experience of what it means to go through a transition previously. And that already, coming back to your very first question during our call, enhances their confidence levels and really boosts them up with what they know to be true. And the fact that 50 or 60% of whatever they come to achieve is probably going to turn out differently than they had foreseen it right at the outset.
Beautiful. I've learned so much. That was such a wonderful sharing. Thank you for that. So as we're running out of time, I mean, we can record for 10 hours, and our format, as I mentioned, it's always 40 minutes. That's what people appreciate. We're coming towards the end of the call today. So can you give me an example that really stood up for you when the executive in this situation came to be coached by you? And they were in this transition and they were lucky enough to understand it in transition and also lucky enough to understand they need support because a lot of the executives don't understand even that they require hand holding and deeper support because this is, as you mentioned, one of the most stressful times in their life. You know, they really need to prove themselves. They need to shine. They need to be at best all the time. And as I said, I've seen this that a lot of executives get this that do this really lonely and they get really disheartened by the whole transition. So for the ones who are vulnerable enough to be courageous enough to say, I need support of a coach, can you give me one example that you can remember that came to you and that you felt, wow, that was such a great coaching process or good support, and I managed to really help him or her
Mhm.
resolve this, and then they were able to shine in this new role?
Sure. So this was the case of a chief sales officer, someone who was incredibly good at selling,
Mm-hmm.
who had knocked all the KPIs out of the ballpark, right? I mean, he was overachieving his previous set KPIs any given year. And he had faced this interesting situation in that he always thought of himself to be the biggest of the pack in his peer level. And when the company changed his line manager, his boss, who was the president of the entire region, they didn't even speak to him. So he then reached out after he learned that there's a new incoming boss and he wasn't even part of the process and so on. So he was very disappointed. He spoke to his peer CHRO, and she said to him that essentially with his kind of leadership, I mean, they appreciate his functional technical competence, but with his current level of leadership style, he will never be considered for a bigger role. And that was really the moment where he realized, oh my goodness, it's not just about delivering or over delivering on the number. There is a little more that is expected of me. And so he and the CHRO had this discussion, what can we do? And so he decided that he wanted to work with someone like myself. So it was not a transition case, but it was a maximizing leadership impact kind of a case. And so we had this very first conversation with his line manager, CHRO, and him and myself in the room. And this was one of the toughest moments in his career. It's at least what he told me on the back end of that session. His line manager, essentially said, look, this gentleman, let's call him John.
Mm-hmm.
John is full of himself. He thinks too high of himself. He thinks that he's one head and one neck above everyone else at his peer level. And his boss used to serve in the French military. I have seen some really arrogant military commanders, but he really has to be one of the highest in terms of arrogance that I have seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this guy is in the room and the CHRO looks a little hapless here. Anyway, so that was the end of the conversation. And then we stayed put and those two individuals left the boardroom. And he said, this is really like, I was not expecting that. And B, I'm really angry now. And I'm thinking I need to call him up and tell him what I wanted to always tell him. And I said, I don't think that's a good idea. So anyway, that was the mandate. Mm-hmm. And so we worked together, and I won't, go into the detail, but this is 10 sessions in. So, 8-9 months into our coaching engagement, my phone rings at a late hour. He was based in Dubai. I was based in Dubai. So it's like past 9 p.m. and my phone rings. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, it's his number. So it's probably some kind of an emergency. So I pick up the phone and his voice is shivering. His voice is like trembling. And he's like, Navid, I just wanted to let you know that I have received the positive news of a big promotion and I will be moving to the US. So it is possible, despite all odds. And we had a midway conversation with the line manager and CHRO again, where he felt very bullish that he has overachieved all the behavioral stuff he wanted to demonstrate. And they acknowledged improvement, but not enough. Again, he was very angry that they don't want to acknowledge his progress. How come? And so on. But really, once you meet them where they are at and they are able to demonstrate the other side that we all have, which is the more, refined levels of leadership and the style of leadership we are asked to demonstrate more often, that's when the, switch will turn around. And that's when even the biggest promotions can come their way unexpectedly.
Wonderful. And I really want to empower leaders who listen to this to really take this into consideration, because I've seen this as well as you, Navid, again and again and again. When somebody hires a coach who is going to support them through the transition, even with the frameworks that you have highlighted so beautifully for us, they can become even more powerful. And also people who are preparing for the roles, who are technically brilliant, overachiever, KPIs, strategies in place, that sometimes the soft part, it's really, really important, which is how we do things. It's equally important to what we do at the end of the day. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming to this podcast. It was joy and pleasure to meet you. Do you have any call for actions for the audience? Anything that you feel, besides reading your book, which I really feel that everybody should do, who's listening to this, anything that you would love to ask spontaneously for the audience to consider?
Sure. I would like to recite an individual called Nassim Taleb, and he once said, it's a very famous quote, "Invest in preparedness, not in prediction." And so my good mentor, Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, said it equally elegantly with his book, "What Got You Here Won't Get You There." So my advice is to any executive that is going to be in a career transition, to really not assume that they have everything that they need in order to be successful, but to seek professional and qualified support. So that will be my call of action.
Well, thank you so much, Navid. Thank you so much for coming to this podcast today. Everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in. It's lovely to have you all here. We're really grateful for our community. I hope this was a good one. You've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. I'm like, where is the book? I'm going to go immediately and start reading myself to upskill myself, my coaching skills. Thank you once again for tuning in. And Navid, thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you, Zoran.